On Primetime News tonight, Wednesday's parliamentary by-elections handed 3 victories to the ruling Saenuri Party and none to the main opposition. That's left one side celebrating as the other looks within to find out how they went wrong. Before the U.S. Congress, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe acknowledged his country's past wrongdoings, but chose not to apologize for the wartime wounds it inflicted, particularly on the surviving victims of its sexual slavery program. The world's largest economies post slower growth in the first quarter this year, negating earlier positive forecasts. We have these stories and more coming right up. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Thursday, April 30th. I'm Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Thank you for tuning in.
Let's start with Wednesday's by-elections results.
It was 2 very different stories for Korea's 2 biggest political parties. The ruling Saenuri Party surprised many by sweeping to victory in 3 of the 4 vacant seats.
As you predicted before we started yesterday's newscast.
Exactly.
Right. The main opposition party surprised itself by failing to win a single race. For more, here's our Park Ji-won.
It was a surprise victory for the ruling Saenuri Party. The Conservative Party ended up winning 3 of the 4 parliamentary seats up for grabs in Wednesday's by-elections. A Liberal independent candidate took the remaining seat. It was a night to forget for the main opposition party, which failed to secure a single victory, even in its traditional stronghold districts. Seoul's Gwanak-B, a traditional liberal hotbed, was won by the ruling Saenuri Party's Oh Shin-hwan with over 43% of the vote. The liberal vote was split with the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's Chung Tae-ho earning some 34%, while independent Chung Dong-young, who used to be a key man in the main opposition party, finished with more than 20% of the votes. Jungwon District in Seongnam, Gyeonggi-do Province went to the ruling Saenuri Party's Shin Sang-jin in an easy victory. He locked down more than 55% of the votes, while the main opposition's Chung Hwan-seok could only muster 35%. In Incheon's Ganghwa-B district, the Saenuri Party candidate An Sang-soo, former Incheon mayor, beat the NPAD's Shin Dong-gun 54% to 42%. The nightmare was complete when the NPAD also lost in Gwangju's Seoggu-B district, a constituency which has been in the Liberal Party's hands for 13 straight elections. Independent Chun Jung-bae, former justice minister during the Roh Moo-hyun administration, took more than 52% of the votes. The final voter turnout stood at 36%. That includes ballots cast during a 2-day early voting period last weekend, and it's slightly higher than the 33% turnout in last July's by-elections. The rise in turnout has been attributed to the extra interest sparked by the recent bribery scandal. The 4 seats were mainly vacated by the dissolution of the pro-North Korea Unified Progressive Party late last year. The newly elected lawmakers will have 1 year in the job until the general elections next April. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And regarding the ruling party's sweeping victory, President Park Geun-hye says the results reflect the public's desire for an end to political strife.
And she also called it a mandate from the public to push through with political reforms. In a statement read by her spokesperson today, the president said she will honor voters' wishes by revitalizing the economy and carrying out reforms, including updates to the public employee pension system. And there was very little champagning after campaigning for the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy. They're at a crossroads after Wednesday's crushing defeat.
The party has been left to ponder its future as the election results came despite the ruling party being embroiled in the recent bribery list scandal. Ji Myung-gil has more.
Opposition leader Moon Jae-in took responsibility for the NPAD's spectacular failure to win any of the 4 National Assembly seats that were up for grabs in Wednesday's by-elections.
I don't blame anyone. I will reflect upon my shortcomings and start over again. I'll try to bring about greater reform and unification.
Disillusioned members of the party are demanding a complete overhaul of the MPD's policy agenda. They are also expected to push for ways to resolve the internal power struggle between those loyal to former President Roh Moo-hyun on the one side and Kim Dae-jung on the other. Moon Jae-in's leadership is also coming under intense scrutiny, adding to the sense of crisis within the party. The party lost on its home turf of Gwangju and the traditionally left-leaning Seoul district of Gwanak-bi, leading some to say the MPD has lost its identity as an opposition party. Moon, who lost in the 2012 race to President Park Geun-hye, was being touted as a potential liberal candidate for the 2017 presidential election. But Wednesday's embarrassing loss has put a major dent in his hopes of running for the top job again. On the flip side, the chief of the ruling Saenuri Party, Kim Moo-sung, has cemented his leadership and raised his status as a potential presidential candidate in 2 years' time. Despite the bribery allegations swirling around some of its senior members, the ruling Saenuri Party's impressive performance has given it a mandate to push ahead with its reform drives and economic initiatives.
We urgently need to pass economy-related bills and reform the pension system for public workers. By doing this, we'll be able to pass on a strong and fiscally sound country to the future generations.
The Saenuri Party's victory is also expected to help President Park tighten her grip on state affairs and aid the administration in its push to fight corruption. Kim Young-git, Arirang News.
Now, shifting gears, Abe again chose to ignore calls for him to apologize for Japan's sexual slavery during World War II. In his speech to the U.S. Congress, he said only that Japan brought suffering to Asia while offering his condolences for the American lives lost during the war. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
There was no shift in his stance. During a 45-minute speech to a joint meeting of the House and the Senate at the U.S. Congress on Wednesday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed deep remorse over his country's role in World War II, but he stopped short of offering a clear apology for such atrocities as the sexual enslavement of women from Korea, China, and other nations.
Our actions brought suffering to the peoples in Asian countries.
Focusing more on the future of the U.S.-Japan military alliance than Tokyo's past wrongdoings, Abe did not use any apologetic expressions during his landmark speech. Instead, he said that armed conflicts have always made women suffer the most. The remark is being seen as an attempt to make sexual slavery look like just one of many human rights violations that happened during war. It was in clear contrast with the apologetic tone Abe struck about U.S. suffering during the war.
I offer, with profound respect, my eternal condolences to the souls of all American people that were lost during World War II.
Many critics urged Abe to use the speech to make a public apology about Japan's wartime atrocities to alleviate concerns that he's trying to dilute past official statements of remorse by his predecessors. The absence of an apology is expected to cast a shadow over the prospect of Seoul-Tokyo ties improving anytime soon. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And following the Japanese leader's speech before the U.S. Congress, Korea expressed its deep regret for what the speech did not contain, a sincere apology to the victims of Japan's wartime atrocities. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Korea slammed Japan on Thursday for missing an opportunity to apologize to the so-called comfort women. In his speech before the U.S. Congress, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe upheld previous apologies and acknowledged Japan had caused suffering in the region. But there was no mention of the 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery by Japan during World War II.
We find it regrettable that there was no acknowledgement or a sincere apology. It could have become a turning point for Japan by achieving true reconciliation and cooperation with neighboring countries through a correct sense of history.
Abe's approach to history outraged some Democratic members of Congress. Ed Royce, the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, said Abe must not miss the next opportunity to offer a message of reconciliation. Congressman Mike Conduct called the speech shocking and shameful and added that the Japanese leader continues to evade his government's responsibility. Now the question is whether Abe's statement on the 70th anniversary of the war's end, due in August, will offer anything more. Most watchers say this congressional address is as apologetic as Abe is going to get.
Well, who knows? He can add a couple of more words, but that wouldn't carry that much meaning for us. So I don't expect he would express any deeper repentance for the Japanese past.
While Abe's U.S. Congress speech has disappointed Koreans, experts say that the best way to move forward is for the two leaders to talk it out. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And after much speculation, it's official. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will not be attending events in Russia next week, marking the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters on a conference call on Thursday that Kim has decided to stay in Pyongyang. He said the decision was related to the North's internal affairs. Earlier, Russia had repeatedly said the young North Korean leader had confirmed his attendance, although Pyongyang never gave an official comment on the matter. The trip would have been Kim Jong-un's first overseas since he took power back in 2011. Let's move over to the unresolved issues at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, where the wage hike standoff continues. The South Korean government is planning to hold higher-level talks with North Korea to discuss its unilateral wage hike. But according to our Kim Hyun-bin, so far, they're having trouble connecting.
No answer. That's Pyongyang's current response to Seoul's previous attempts to set a meeting. Recently, South Korea has tried to make contact through the Kaesong Industrial District Management Committee, with no tangible results.
North Korea's dissatisfaction towards the South Korean government has piled up. It seems like Pyongyang is trying to manage and run the joint industrial complex on its own. That's why they are unwilling to consult with Seoul.
On Thursday, an official from South Korea's Unification Ministry said that, given the silence, Seoul is moving on to propose high-level talks. Experts say the talks need to happen soon.
There are many problems that need to be addressed, but it is unclear how much Pyongyang will actively engage in talks.
North Korea decided to raise the minimum monthly wage by a little over 5% to $74 in March without consulting South Korea. Seoul says the move violated a 2004 agreement that calls for the two sides to set wages together. 18 of the 124 South Korean firms at the complex have already sent out March paychecks. But the Unification Ministry officials said that there have been no slowdowns or strikes by North Korean workers, even though most of their employers have not paid. The joint factory opened in 2004 and employs about 53,000 North Korean workers. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Five days after the devastating earthquake in Nepal that took nearly 5,500 lives and left more than 11,000 injured, a 15-year-old boy was pulled from the ruins of a collapsed hotel. The teen was rescued in Kathmandu by Nepal's armed police force on Thursday and has been taken to a nearby hospital. Rescue workers continue to face problems digging through the rubble and reaching remote areas affected by the 7.8 magnitude quake that occurred on Saturday. Meanwhile, just over 100 Koreans, including high school students and tourists, were safely escorted back to Korea Thursday afternoon via a special charter flight. The Korean Air Boeing 777 jet had departed for Kathmandu earlier in the day and was carrying food, water, and other aid supplies for the quake-hit nation.
In other news, a shocking first quarter growth rate in the U.S. following China's slowest growth in 6 years is raising concerns that positive forecasts for this year may not come true. Our Kwon So-ah reports on how that could affect the Korean economy.
The U.S. posted a sluggish GDP growth of 0.2% in the first 3 months of the year. Shocking, considering that's way below earlier predictions of a 1% rise. The slowdown has been blamed on harsh winter weather, low global crude prices, lower hiring, and the rising dollar. The downturn is affecting the much-talked-about U.S. Federal Reserve rate increase. The Fed is keeping its target interest rate near 0%, where it's been since late 2008. While optimists had anticipated a raise in June, the U.S. Commerce Department's first quarter figures have shifted the timeline towards September at the very earliest. The disappointment comes just 2 weeks after China's first quarter GDP came in at 7%, the lowest pace since 2009 after the global financial crisis. The combination of low American and Chinese growth is having an effect on the Korean economy too.
The global economy was expected to improve this year from last due to a positive outlook for the U.S. But with the sluggish first quarter results and the fear that China's economy will remain slow, Korea's growth rate could fall too, as these factors will also have an impact on Korean exports.
The U.S. Fed said the first quarter low growth was due to, quote, transitory factors. Experts say positive data in the housing market, manufacturing sector, and business investment have enough potential to spur growth in the U.S. in the second quarter, translating into a faster pickup in the global economy. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And Korea's industrial output shrank in March from the previous month, pulled down by a sharp decline in electronics and steel products. Data from Statistics Korea shows production across all sectors fell 0.6% in March from a month earlier. The agency attributes the decline to a high base effect in the previous month when output rose 2.2%, as well as increased overseas production of key electronic parts.
Colon cancer is the third most common cancer in the world.
And in 2012, there were 1.4 million new cases and over 690,000 deaths from the disease.
And believe it or not, Korea accounted for the highest number of cases. Here's our Kim Min-ji with the details.
Colon cancer has become a common disease in Western countries, but recent data shows that Korea has the world's highest rate. According to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, 45 in every 100,000 Korean people had colon cancer in 2012. That puts Korea at the top of the list for the disease out of 184 countries, followed by Slovakia and Hungary. The figure also far outnumbers the global average, which stood at 17.2. In fact, the number of people in Korea diagnosed with the disease is rising quickly, more than doubling over the past 10 years. Doctors cite a number of reasons for the rapid rise.
It's a disease that's been more common in Europe or North America, but more Koreans are turning to westernized eating patterns and lifestyles, raising colon cancer rates. Also, although more research is needed, it's likely that Koreans have genes that make them more prone to colon cancer.
He also attributed the higher rate to Koreans going through more screenings. The good news is that it's 100% curable if treated early, though not everyone recognizes the signs. Colon cancer is difficult to detect in the early stages as many people show little or no symptoms. The signs that do indicate there's a problem, such as vomiting or weight loss, are often confused or overlooked with other conditions. Colon cancer cells spread faster than other cancer cells, so a person's chance of survival decreases as time progresses.
We advise people with even slight symptoms to visit the doctor, and those with a history of cancer in the family should get regular screenings, especially those who are over 50 years old.
He says regular exercise and eating more high-fiber foods such as fruit and vegetables can significantly reduce a person's chance of getting colon cancer. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And for more top headlines from around the world, we connect to Paul Yi at the News Center.
Well, our focus today, protests erupt in New York against police violence. Pope Francis calls attention to equal pay for women, and Vietnam marks 40 years of peace.
Paul, let's start off in the United States. Demonstrations were held across the East Coast as public anger boils over at the latest high-profile case of police violence against African Americans. Where were some of the biggest hot spots?
Well, there were major rallies on Wednesday from Boston to Washington, where protesters near the White House held signs and chanted, "Stop racist police terror." In New York City, over 1,000 people gathered at Union Square to voice their outrage against what they call a widespread problem of police brutality and racial profiling. Many who marched through the streets of Lower Manhattan called on law enforcement agencies to find a better way.
And it's getting lost, and it's getting lost. And instead of looking at the root, we're looking at the riot when the root is more important. They murdered somebody, you know, and a life was taken. So I think we need to start paying attention to that instead of and put more on preservation of life than preservation of buildings or whatever and property. I don't care about that. I care about people that look like me's lives.
Meanwhile, hundreds in Baltimore converged on City Hall 2 days after the worst rioting in decades. Demonstrators defying the curfew vowed they would continue to protest until those responsible for Freddie Gray's death were brought to justice. The 25-year-old black man suffered fatal injuries to his spine last month while in police custody. And shifting to the Vatican, Pope Francis has made an impassioned appeal for gender equality, calling the wage gap between men and women a scandal. Addressing a crowd at St. Peter's Square, Francis said Christians should defend the right to equal pay for equal work. Leader of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics also stressed the importance of taking maternity as well as paternity leave when raising a family.
As Christians, we must become more demanding about these issues. For instance, we must support decisively the right to equal pay for equal work. Why is it taken for granted that women must earn less than men? No. They have the same rights. The discrepancy is a pure scandal.
According to Eurostat, women in the European Union were paid more than 16% less than men in 2013. The gender income discrepancy was even wider in the United States. Census data found that women earned 70 cents for every dollar their male counterparts took home, based on annual salaries. And finally, the people of Vietnam are marking the 40th anniversary of the end to one of the deadliest conflicts in his country's history. Thousands of children, veterans, and soldiers marched through the center of Ho Chi Minh City on this Thursday. The military parade celebrated the fall of Saigon when North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the presidential palace gates and hoisted the communist flag.
I'm here today with many others. We are gathered here to remember our country's memories. When I watch the reenactments, I feel very touched by our nation's patriotism.
It's good to see Vietnam becoming robust, becoming strong, organized. I want to see the corruption gone.
The Vietnamese government claims up to 4 million lives were lost during the war, many of them civilians. The U.S. Department of Defense says over 58,000 American troops died during the conflict, which involved several other countries, including China, Australia, and South Korea. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
It was pretty hot today in the capital. The high climbed to 28.3 this afternoon, making it feel like early July. And the summery weather will continue tomorrow, with Daegu expected to see a high near 30 in the afternoon. And we'll have more dazzling sunshine. UV levels could be higher than today, so have your sunglasses and sunblock with you before heading outdoors. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. So while the high in Seoul and Daegu will get up to 27 and 29, Gwangju and Busan will hit 28 and 23 respectively. And as for the other regions, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 28 and 22, while Dokdo rises to 21. Now tomorrow is Labor Day here in Korea, meaning that some of you have a long holiday weekend ahead. The weather will stay relatively warm until Saturday, but we have a morning rain in the forecast on Sunday, which will bring temperatures back down to the seasonal norms. And looking ahead, Children's Day on Tuesday look to be rain-free and warm. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the globe.
Well, Einstein once said life is like riding a bike. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. Are you keep moving, Daniel?
I think I am. I believe you keep jogging every day instead of cycling.
Right. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for staying with us. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Do join us same time tomorrow. Good night for now.